The notice didn't come in an envelope. It came folded under the windshield wiper of my truck, fluttering slightly in the morning wind like it didn't quite believe it belonged there. Bright orange paper, bold black lettering. The kind of font people use when they want authority without conversation. Notice of unauthorized occupancy. I stood there in the gravel lot, one hand still gripping a bag of feed, reading it again and again. Unauthorized occupancy. Two words that made no sense together when applied to land my family had owned since before paved roads reached this valley. I looked up, scanning the fence line, expecting someone to laugh and tell me it was a joke. That's when I saw her. She stood just off the road near the gate, tablet tucked under one arm, sunglasses reflecting the pasture like she was studying a map already printed in her head. She wasn't dressed for the land. Clean shoes, crisp posture. Someone who didn't expect dust to argue back. She raised a hand in a small wave. Not friendly, more like acknowledgement. That was the first moment I understood this wasn't a mistake. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 61 years old. I spent most of my life as a civil engineer, designing infrastructure meant to survive floods, earthquakes, and the kind of pressure that exposes bad assumptions fast. Bridges don't forgive shortcuts. Neither does land. 8 years ago, after my wife Elaine passed, I came back to the property my grandfather bought outright before the county lines were finalized. 130 acres of mixed pasture and creek land that didn't care who I used to be or what titles I'd held. Elaine's ashes are spread along the cottonwoods by the creek. I walk that line every morning with a mug of coffee, talking to her like she's still listening, correcting my footing, laughing when I miss a step. So when a stranger told me I didn't belong there, something cold settled in my chest. She approached slowly, heels crunching awkwardly on gravel. Up close, she smelled like something expensive and unfamiliar. Not perfume. Control. "Mr. Mercer," she said, like we'd already met. "I'm Natalie Pierce, chair of the Ridgehaven Residential Association." I didn't offer my hand. She tapped the paper under my wiper with one manicured finger. "Your property falls within an expanded governance boundary approved last year. You're currently occupying land under dispute." I laughed once, short and sharp, before I could stop myself. "This land was here before your subdivision," I said. "Before the road? Before the power lines? You're standing on my gate?" She smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "So were a lot of things," she said, "until they were updated." That word followed me for weeks. Updated 3 days later. Sheriff's deputy knocked on my door. He didn't look comfortable standing there. Shifted his weight. Kept glancing at the porch rail like he was hoping it would give him an excuse to leave. "Mr. Mercer," he said, holding out papers he clearly didn't want to serve. "You've been named in a civil filing regarding disputed property ownership." I took them, thanked him, watched him walk back to his cruiser without meeting my eyes that night. I sat at the kitchen table under a single light. The papers spread out like evidence in a crime scene. Maps, surveys, legal language designed to overwhelm, not explain. They claimed my eastern boundary overlapped with a newly recorded development expansion tied to Ridgehaven. They referenced zoning adjustments I'd never heard of, agreements I'd never signed. The documents were polished, convincing, almost right. That's what bothered me. Engineering taught me that failure usually hides inside details people assume no one will check. I went to the county records office the next morning. Martha was working the desk. She'd been there longer than anyone remembered. Knew my grandfather's handwriting? Knew which file drawer stuck in the summer. She frowned the moment she saw the survey numbers. "These don't match our archive sequence," she said quietly. "They look formatted correctly, but they don't connect to anything recorded." I felt my stomach tighten. "So they're fake?" She didn't say fake. She said they're unrooted. Ridgehaven didn't wait. They filed for an emergency injunction claiming my continued presence posed safety and liability risks to the community. Said my equipment was unsightly, my livestock unsanitary, my creek an environmental hazard. The judge granted a temporary restriction within 48 hours. A contractor installed a lock on my eastern gate. That gate led to my well. I watched from the fence as water trucks pulled into my neighbor's field to keep my cattle alive while my pump sat idle behind a fence I wasn't allowed to cross. That was the first time anger outweighed grief. I hired an attorney I couldn't afford. Mark Levinson. Quiet voice. Sharp eyes. The kind of man who read case law like other people read weather reports. He studied Ridgehaven's filings for 2 days without comment. Then he looked up and asked one question. Did they ever show you where their authority actually begins? They hadn't, because it didn't. The first thing Mark Levinson did was not argue with the paperwork. He didn't scoff or dismiss it or talk about how ridiculous the claims were. He spread everything out on his desk, lined the pages carefully, and stared at them in silence. For a long time, that told me more than any reassurance. Could have Mark had the kind of patience you only develop after watching people lose cases they should have won? Because they spoke too early. He treated documents like structures. You didn't insult them. You tested them. These are dangerous, he finally said. Not fake. Not wrong. Dangerous. He pointed to the maps first. They're too clean. Real survey updates are messy. Revisions on revisions. Marginal notes. Conflicting references. These look like someone recreated history instead of uncovering it. That matched the itch in my head. I couldn't. Scratched out the injunction Ridgehaven secured. Locked me out of the eastern section of my land pending review. That meant no access to my well, my equipment shed, or the lower pasture. The judge hadn't ruled on ownership. He'd ruled on risk. Risk, apparently, was me. 2 deputies supervised the installation of the lock. They didn't look comfortable either. One of them recognized me. Looked like he wanted to say something. Didn't? When the gate closed with a hollow metallic echo, it felt final in a way paperwork never does. That night I slept in my truck near the fence line, watching the dark pasture I wasn't allowed to enter. The cattle pressed against the wire, confused, lowing softly. Used to wandering freely to water that no longer belonged to them. Ridgehaven. They didn't contact me again for a week. They didn't need to. The pressure was doing its job. Water trucks cost money. Temporary boarding costs more. Every day without access was another small financial wound that didn't look serious until you counted them. Together, Mark filed a motion challenging the injunction's scope. Ridgehaven responded within hours with supplemental filings alleging safety concerns, environmental violations, and aggressive conduct. Aggressive. That word showed up a lot. I'd built bridges that survived 100-year floods. But apparently I was a danger because my tractor wasn't aesthetically aligned with a gated community 5 miles away. Mark requested discovery. That's when Ridgehaven made their second mistake. They complied too quickly. We received hundreds of pages within days. Financial summaries. Meeting minutes. Authority references. Organizational charts. Most fraudulent operations resist transparency. They stall. They deflect. Ridgehaven flooded. Yes. Mark smiled for the first time when he saw the timestamps. These weren't assembled over years, he said. They were assembled recently. Someone panicked. We started tracing names. Ridgehaven Residential Association. WASNT registered as a homeowners association under state law. It was listed as a community advisory collective. No enforcement authority. No legal standing to impose fines or control land. Yet, they'd been collecting monthly fees from residents for over a decade, pool maintenance, security, Patrols. Community landscaping. None of those services existed. The community had no pool, no contracted guards. Landscaping was handled individually by homeowners. Where was the money going? We followed it. A management firm called Pierce Civic Solutions appeared on every financial document. Owned by Natalie Pierce. Fees flowed from Ridgehaven accounts into Pierce Civic accounts. Then into personal accounts. $3 million over 11 years? That wasn't mismanagement. That was a system. I started talking to other landowners quietly, carefully. A woman south of me had signed a settlement after being told her orchard violated community buffer requirements. A retired couple lost mineral access rights after being buried in filings they couldn't afford to fight. Every case used slightly different language. Every case ended with the same offer: settle quietly, stop asking questions. Natalie Pierce showed up in person for some of them. Always calm, always helpful, always carrying documents thick enough to intimidate. She didn't threaten, she explained. Consequences. That's how pressure works best. Then, she turned her attention back to me. I received a police report accusing me of harassment. Natalie claimed I followed her vehicle, photographed her home, and made her feel unsafe. She submitted security footage. My truck was visible near her street. The timestamp said it was from 3 days earlier, but my truck logs GPS automatically for insurance. I was 17 miles away. The footage had been altered. That was no longer a civil matter. Federal investigators get interested when evidence fabrication enters the picture. They contacted Mark first, then me. They didn't promise anything, didn't explain what they suspected. They asked questions instead. How long had Ridgehaven been collecting fees? Who controlled the accounts? How many people were affected? We gave them everything. That's when they asked about the annual meeting. Ridgehaven held one every year. Mandatory attendance, voting procedures, financial updates. Let it happen, the investigator said. We want her talking, Mark coordinated quietly. I stayed out of sight. The meeting room filled beyond capacity. Homeowners looked tense, confused, angry, and small. Careful ways. Natalie stood at the podium, confident, explaining necessary increases, external threats, and ongoing legal matters involving hostile adjacent actors. That was me. Mark stood slowly. Before we vote, he said, calm and clear, could you show the residents where the community pool is located? Silence. Natalie smiled tightly. The pool is still in the development phase. For 11 years, Mark asked. Murmurs spread. And the security patrols? He continued. Which company holds that contract? Natalie deflected. I activated the projector bank. Records filled the screen. Account. Numbers. Transfers. Totals $3 million. Gasps. Shouting. Questions overlapping. Natalie raised her voice. Accused me of sabotage. Claimed documents were fabricated. That's when the agents entered. Badges. Visible.com. Unavoidable. They arrested her at the podium. No speech. No denial. Just handcuffs and reality. The room didn't cheer. It processed weeks later. Every land claim Ridgehaven filed was dismissed. The injunction was lifted. The lock removed. I turned the pump. Back on myself. Water flowed like nothing had happened. Natalie pled guilty to wire fraud and conspiracy. Sentenced to decades. The investigation expanded into other counties, other communities, other victims. The structure collapsed once pressure found the cracks. I walked the creek again that morning, coffee in hand, cottonwoods whispering like they always had. Elaine would have liked this chapter. Not because I fought, but because I didn't let fear replace truth. Pressure doesn't create failure, it reveals it. The silence after Natalie Pierce was led out of the meeting hall wasn't relief. It wasn't victory either. It was the sound people make when they realize something they trusted for years was never real. No one spoke for nearly a full minute. 300 homeowners sat frozen in folding chairs, staring at the empty podium where a confident authority figure had stood moments earlier. The microphone still hummed softly. A half-finished slide, showing budget projections, remained frozen on the screen, mocking everyone who had believed the numbers meant something. I stayed where I was, near the back wall. This part wasn't mine. People began talking all at once, not shouting, asking, needing confirmation that what they'd just witnessed was real. That their money hadn't simply evaporated into thin air without explanation. That the past decade of payments, promises, and excuses had not been a collective hallucination. Federal agents moved efficiently. They directed witnesses, collected initial statements, and quietly secured electronic equipment from behind the podium. Natalie's laptop, her tablet, backup drives no one in the room knew existed. One agent approached me and nodded once. "You did what you needed to do," she said. "Now, let us finish it." Mark found me near the exit a few minutes later. He looked tired. Satisfied, but tired in the way people do after watching something heavy finally fall. "She pled verbally on the spot," he said quietly. "Didn't contest the arrest. That usually means she knows how deep it goes." I asked him what would happen next. "Everything," he said. "For her, and a lot of paperwork for everyone else." Outside, news vans had already lined the street. Camera lights cut through the dusk like sharp questions. I avoided them and drove home the long way. Back roads curling past fields that didn't care about courtrooms or fraud. The lock on my eastern gate was gone when I arrived. Just gone. No note. No apology. No explanation. I opened it myself and drove through slowly, stopping at the well. I ran my hand over the pump housing, felt the vibration as it came back online. Water surged through pipes that had been dry for too long. That sound grounded me. The cattle wandered back instinctively. No hesitation. No confusion. Just familiarity, returning where it belonged. Over the next week, everything moved faster than I expected. Ridgehaven's filings were dismissed in bulk. Not reviewed. Dismissed. The injunction was declared improperly granted based on falsified evidence. The judge issued a written acknowledgement of error that Mark framed and hung in his office. Natalie's assets were frozen within 48 hours. Accounts seized. Vehicles impounded. Property flagged for restitution. Federal investigators expanded their inquiry into 3 neighboring counties. The pattern repeated. Similar advisory associations. Similar fee structures. Similar threats. Similar settlements extracted quietly from people who couldn't afford to fight. It turned out Ridgehaven wasn't a singular fraud. It was a template. Homeowners began meeting again within days. This time, without scripts. Without staged authority. Just people sitting in the same room, asking what now. They asked me to attend. I went once. Not to lead. Not to advise. Just to listen. The first question someone asked wasn't about money or governance. It was, how did we miss this? No one answered right away. Finally, an older man stood and said, because she didn't act like a criminal. She acted like a manager. That settled in the room. Natalie Pierce hadn't stolen with force. She hadn't shouted or threatened openly. She organized. She scheduled. She explained delays. She blamed paperwork. She used complexity like camouflage. And people trusted that. Restitution checks arrived months later. Not full repayment, but enough to hurt less. Enough to rebuild some trust. The community voted to dissolve Ridgehaven entirely and rebuild under a legally registered books association with transparent books and rotating oversight. Independent audits were mandated. Financial reports published monthly. No single individual allowed unchecked control again. They offered me a board seat. I declined. That chapter wasn't mine. My chapter was behind the fence, along the creek, under the cottonwoods where Elaine rested. I started repairing things. I'd postponed fences, equipment, the barn roof that had leaked for years, because fixing it felt pointless during the dispute. I planted along the creek again, not for aesthetics, for continuity. Some mornings I still expected to see Natalie's car near the gate. Control has a way of haunting memory longer than it should. But it never came. Her sentencing was covered briefly in the local paper. A few lines buried near the middle. No drama. Just numbers, years, charges, restitution. That felt right. Criminals like her thrive on attention. Justice works better without it. One evening, months later, I sat by the creek with coffee cooling in my hands. The light slanted through the cottonwoods just right. Elaine would have commented on it. She always noticed light. I told her everything. The parts I hadn't said out loud yet. The fear, the anger. The moment I almost settled just to make it stop. I didn't, I said quietly. I stayed. The creek answered the way it always had. Engineering taught me that pressure doesn't break strong structures. It exposes weak ones. Natalie's system collapsed because it had no foundation. Just repetition and confidence. Mine held because it was real. Land doesn't care about paperwork. It remembers who works it, who respects it, who doesn't try to rewrite it for convenience. I still get letters sometimes. People in other counties asking how to tell if an association is legitimate. What questions to ask. What documents matter? I answer when I can, because silence is what systems like hers rely on most. And I've had enough of that. The gate stays open now. The well runs. The creek moves on. And every morning, when I walk that line with coffee in hand, I know exactly where I stand.